So how do we understand it then, if we're sort of saddled as not really able to understand this? What do we do? Well, what I want to do is I want to talk about this exponential growth a little bit more. And in particular, I want to give you an example so that you can understand this a little better. So let's think about how we can understand this chart. And here's the example I'm going to give you. I have a magic eyedropper. And what's magic about it is that when I put this drop of water in my hand, it's going to double every minute. So imagine I put a drop on and we wait a minute, and then I have 2 drops in my hand. And then I wait another minute and I've got 4 drops. And then I wait 6 minutes and I can just about fill up a thimble. Do you understand? Do you have a sense of that growth? All right, so I want you to follow me now. We're going somewhere. We're going to Wembley Stadium. And this is my show, so I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to make the stadium watertight. And I'm going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats. 12 o'clock tomorrow, there you are handcuffed to the highest row of bleacher seats. And I go down onto the pitch, and I put one of these magic drops out in the middle, so small you can't possibly see it. The question is this. We start at 12 o'clock, the magic drop comes out. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? That's the question. Is it days, weeks, years, months, seconds? How long do you think you've got? A couple answers here. Anything. Just shout one out if you've got one.
2 days.
2 days. Anything else?
4 hours.
4 hours.
6 hours.
6 hours. Okay, we started at 12 o'clock. You have until 12:50 that same day. All right, so I see some skeptics out there, right? So this guy's thinking, he's way off in his guess as to how big Wembley Stadium is. So I'm off by 100%, all right? 12:51 for you, okay? All right, so that's actually not the important question. This is the important question. At what time is this park, this stadium, still 97% empty space? And how many of you realize the seriousness of your predicament? 12:45. 45 minutes, we fill up 3% of the park. 5 more minutes, it's over. It's completely full. All of human history till 1960 to put 3 billion people on the planet. 40 years for the next 3 billion people. We tend to think linearly. We hear about 70 million new people on the surface of the planet every year. That's population growth. And that sounds linear to us, 70 and then 70 and then 70, but it's not. And the really interesting part about this is that where you are in the curve makes all the difference in the world. So here's an example. I want to go back to oil consumption. Remember I said, well, okay, we've got this oil consumption. It looks like a hockey stick chart. So right here, oil shock 1, early 1970s. It's a geopolitical event, right? Jimmy Carter comes out and gives this incredible speech saying, we have a real problem on our hands and we're going to have to think about energy and we have to fundamentally change our relationship with energy. And we didn't. We took that opportunity in the United States, at least, to not engage in that material and go a different direction. All right, that's fine. And now we have oil shock 2. That came about in July of 2008 when we hit $147 a barrel. And that one happened for a very different reason than the first oil shock. The second oil shock, we saw something that we'd never seen before in the data. For 6 quarters, for a year and a half, in the run-up to that July 2008 moment, out of those 6 quarters, supply had been exceeded by demand for 5 of those quarters. We'd never seen that before. Now they're talking about congressional commissions, was it speculators? There might have been people speculating on the price of oil, but they were doing it for a very good reason. They were looking at a fundamental supply-demand mismatch. We were pumping as hard and as fast as we could. If you were an oil producer, you had every motivation to get your oil out of the ground when it was over $100 a barrel. So we were pumping as hard as we possibly could, and we still got beaten in terms of supply by demand for 5 out of 6 quarters. That's a powerful moment. So it means that the mistake in this story would be thinking that because we had 30 years between the first 2 oil shocks, that we've got another 30 years between oil shock 2 and oil shock 3. And the reason for that is we're not on the same part of the curve anymore. We are in a fundamentally different place because we can reasonably predict where the cap is on this. We know how big this stadium is. So we are in a very different place on this curve, and it's important to understand that. And this is why I spend a little bit of time talking about exponential curves, about exponential functions, because that's the world we live in. We're surrounded by these things. They interact with each other. They intersect. And it's a key concept of the crash course. It's another one. Yeah, I say they're everywhere. We can find them in all 3 E's. But the key thing I want you to take away from this is speeding up. Because we live in a nonlinear world, these charts have a way of intersecting with each other and create this impression, if not the reality, of events speeding up. And it means that instead of having 50 minutes to figure out how to get out of our handcuffs, knowing where we are in some of these curves, we might realize that we only have a few minutes left in this analogy in order to get things right. And by getting things right, there's some framing I want to put on this. I want to differentiate between problems and predicaments. Problems have solutions. Predicaments have outcomes. You can manage outcomes, but you can never, if you're facing a predicament, get yourself back to your original starting condition by simply applying a few solutions. And it's critical because if various countries around the world are treating these symptoms that I'm talking about as if they're problems and don't realize they're predicaments, it means that we might waste a lot of time on things that don't work. So here's an example. Here's a couple of gentlemen, they have a problem on their hands, right? There's a variety of ways that this could be solved. We could put a solution. We could put a big mattress underneath and they both end up in the same condition they started in, or maybe one guy climbs down or a rope gets lowered. Lots of things we can do. This gentleman, no matter how fast he pinwheels his arms backwards, right, he's going to get wet. He's now got to manage his situation. His outcome is, do I land on my feet or do I belly flop? Right? So that's the difference between problems and predicaments. One has a solution, the other only has outcomes.